somewhere on your phone, there's a headline about missiles, markets, or something that made your chest tighten before you would finish the first sentence. You think you are being informed. You're actually being hijacked. And the hijacker isn't the news channel, it isn't social media. It's 200,000-year-old software running inside your skull, doing exactly what it was built to do in completely the wrong century. That's what we are unpacking today. Hi, I'm Katyani and this is Gately Lately. Your brain was written for one very specific world. Small tribe, constant predators, scarce food, and a very real possibility that the group in the next valley wanted everything you had. In that world, threat detection wasn't a personality trait. It was survival. So your brain got extra good at it. Assuming the worst when information is ambiguous, treating uncertainty itself as threat. The problem, you're not in that world anymore. You're reading emails, sitting in meetings, watching the news at 11 p.m. before you try to sleep. And that same ancient, exquisite, turned threat detection machine is now running its full program, pointed directly at your inbox. There's an old Chinese folk tale about a peasant farmer who's working in his field one day when he hears that a tiger has been spotted nearby. He drops everything, runs home, locks his door, sits rigid with fear all afternoon. His neighbor comes to check on him at sunset. The tiger, the farmer says, it could come at any moment. But you're inside, the neighbor says. The tiger is in the forest. I know, but I can still feel it, said the farmer. His neighbor sits with him a while, eventually says, the tiger in the forest is dangerous, but the tiger in your mind never goes away. And that one only you can face. The threat doesn't have to be real, it just have to be believed. Neuroscientists once dropped volunteers off a 150-foot platform to study how the brain experiences danger into a net. They were fine, but for those 2.7 seconds of free fall, every participant reported the same thing. Time slowed down. Details sharpened, their processing upgraded instantly. That's what the threat response is supposed to do. Fast, sharp, temporary. The problem is the switch off. Because modern threats don't resolve. The news cycle doesn't end. Financial anxiety doesn't close. Social comparison doesn't stop. So a brain built for short, sharp, physical danger ends up running a continuous low-grade threat response for years. Neuroscience calls this allostatic load, the accumulated biological cost of chronic stress. What it does to your health, your decisions, and your relationships over time is honestly not a comfortable treat. And if you want proof, the threat switch is stuck on globally right now, not just personally. Look at where we are in March 2026. The Iran US Israel conflict escalating for months. Missiles, threats, the daily possibility of something larger. And even if you're sitting in Toronto, Tokyo, or Nairobi, thousands of miles from any of it, your nervous system doesn't know that. It reads a headline like a sound in the dark. It processes Gaza and Tehran on your phone before your morning coffee as if they are happening outside your window. That's not an overreaction. That's a system designed for a world where news traveled by foot and only mattered if it was close. Not for a world where geopolitical crises arrive as push notifications at 7 a.m. The threat is real. The scale of your brain's response to it, that's what we are learning to work with. The oldest stories humans ever told knew this about us. Take the Bhagavad Gita. Most people know it as a spiritual text, but look at what's literally happening in the opening scene. Arjun, greatest warrior alive, best weapons, best allies, trained his whole life for this exact moment. He rides his chariot to the center of the battlefield and he collapses. Not from cowardice. His hands start shaking. He tells Krishna, I see omens of chaos, I cannot stand here. What the Gita is describing in 500 BC is a clinically accurate panic attack. Cortisol spike, motor function disruption, tunnel vision. Arjun isn't weak. Arjun is human. And Krishna's entire answer, which becomes the Bhagavad Gita, is essentially a 700 verse manual for functioning when your nervous system is screaming at you to flee. His central teaching isn't just go fight, it is a steady mind in the storm, not the absence of fear, the ability to act through it. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Sun Tzu was writing The Art of War. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Two traditions thousands of miles apart, same conclusion. The first war is always inside your own head. Lose that one and nothing at the border matters. There's a famous story about Nasruddin, the Sufi folk sage who appears in tales across Turkey, Persia, Afghanistan, and Central Asia. He's a wise fool, says ridiculous things that turn out to be profound. One night, Nasruddin's neighbors hear crashing sounds from his house and rush over to find Nasruddin frantically throwing furniture around. What happened? One of them asked. Nasruddin says, "It's fine, I'm just looking for something." "What are you looking for?" "My peace of mind," says Nasruddin. "I had it this morning, then I heard the news." His neighbor stares at him. "Where did you last have it?" The neighbor asks, playing along. Nasruddin thinks for a moment before I started looking for it. Psychologists call it hypervigilance. You're scanning so hard for the threat that you keep the threat system permanently activated. Epictetus, born into slavery in ancient Rome, so he understood what it meant to have zero control over his circumstances, wrote this. Men are disturbed not by things, but by the opinions about things. A young boy is terrified of thunderstorms. Every time one comes, he hides under his bed shaking. His grandmother finds him there one evening during a particularly violent storm and sits beside him on the floor. She doesn't say, "Don't be afraid." She doesn't say, "It's only thunder." She says, "Listen, the sky is talking. Do you know what it's saying?" The boy shakes his head. She closes her eyes. "It's saying, I am here. I am powerful. I am passing." She opens her eyes. Everything that is loud and powerful is also passing. Even this. The boy lies there listening. The thunder rolls. He's still afraid, but now he's also listening. And there is a difference between listening and hiding. That refrain from "that is happening to me" to "this is passing through" is exactly what contemporary mindfulness research identifies as psychological mechanism that converts acute fear into manageable experience. Trauma, anxiety, and chronic stress don't live primarily in the mind, they live in the body, in the nervous system, in the breath, the posture, the tight shoulders, the clenched jaw. That is why soldiers returning from war struggle with the simplest civilian situations. A car backfiring, a crowd, a loud argument, even when they rationally know there is no danger, even though they have been told that the war is over. There's a story told across both Persian and Jewish traditions about King Solomon, one of the wisest rulers in history, who once asked his advisors for something very specific. He wanted a ring, not for beauty, not for power, but one that, when he was sad, would make him happy, and when he was happy, would humble him. His advisors searched everywhere. Finally, a simple goldsmith inscribed four Hebrew words on a plain gold band: Gam Ze Yawar. This too shall pass. Solomon wore it for the rest of his life. Now, here is the thing about that story that most people miss. Most people focus on the comfort in "this too shall pass" when things are bad. But Solomon asked for something that would work both ways. Because a threat response doesn't just activate when things are terrible, it activates when things are good and you're terrified of losing them. When you have worked for something and now live in fear of its ending. This too shall pass is not just consolation. It's a complete philosophy of impermanence that stops the threat response from hijacking your best moments as well as your worst. The Buddhists call this anicca, impermanence. The Stoics called it memento mori. The Taoists called it the natural flow of the Tao. Do we need to really follow a 10-step plan to feel the calm? Not actually. The Zen Buddhists have practiced a particular tradition for 1400 years under the name complete breath. Pranayam traditions in India documented it centuries before that. Here what it is. Double inhale through the nose, short breath, then a second sharp inhale to fully inflate the lungs, followed by one long, slow exhale. That extended exhale manually activates your parasympathetic nervous system, the biological off switch for the threat response. Done in 30 seconds. Available anywhere. 1400 Years of Zen, peer reviewed by Stanford. Works at 2 a.m. when your brain has decided tonight is catastrophe time. Second, the 90-second rule. Neuroanatomist Dr. Jilly Ball Taylor found that chemical cascade of fear or anger lasts just 90 seconds in the body. After that, if you're still anxious, it's not chemistry anymore, it's choice. You're re-triggering it by replaying the thought. So when a headline lands and your chest tightens, wait 90 seconds before you react, respond, or spiral. The tiger in the forest is still there, but the tiger in your mind, you just let it pass through. You're not broken because you feel anxious. You're not weak because the world feels like too much sometimes. You are a 200,000-year-old threat detection system navigating a world built in the last 200 years. The mismatch is real, documented, and here's the part that actually matters: partially fixable. Not by hacking your brain, not by optimizing your morning routine, not by understanding that the system running in the background isn't your enemy. It's just ancient. It's doing its job. It just need occasionally to be reminded you survived the email. The meeting is over. The thing keeping you awake at midnight is not in fact a predator. Krishna is standing on a battlefield with a man whose hands were shaking and whose bow had dropped, didn't say stop feeling afraid. He said you have a right to perform your actions, but you are not entitled to the fruits of those actions. Do what is yours to do. Release what is not yours to control. That's not ancient philosophy. That's the instruction manual your nervous system never came with. If this helped you breathe a little easier today, subscribe to Kately Lately. New perspective every week.